Good morning, everybody. We are recording this podcast from beautiful Wailuku, which is part of this incredible island of Maui that we're able to spend time in. And our guest today is from Langley, and I'll tell you a little bit about Michael from MJS CPA Cross-Border Accounting. But before I do that, this podcast is really intended for expats today. I know we do a lot of podcasts for the Snowbirds that are going down south, but this one is intended for expats. And the topic today is going to be the top 5 reasons why you shouldn't roll your IRA into an RRSP. And I know there's a lot of charming, intelligent financial advisors out there on the Canadian side. We'll tell you this is a wonderful strategy. But today we're going to tell you that maybe you should be looking at other options. So on that note, welcome, Michael, to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Thank you, Gerry. My name is Michael Shomali. We are a CPA firm in Vancouver, Langley, Vancouver. We specialize in cross-border. We deal a lot with expats. We simply focus on U.S. citizens who live in the States or live in Canada, and they have business in the States or business in Canada, and they have pensions, they have retirements, they have educational funds. We deal specifically with these clients. That's most of our business. And we just help them file all the tax they need and try to accommodate them and try to do planning for them to make them pay the least tax possible.
Well, that is fantastic. And that's why we've actually asked you to be on this podcast, because we know you do a very good job out there for those expats that are living up here in Canada. Now, outside of U.S. tax, do you ever deal with anybody who's living in Canadian living in Switzerland? Do you do any international tax whatsoever?
Some, not a lot. A lot of them, the ones I have, they live in Spain, Italy, and Greece. I have a few clients that live in these countries, and I help them with tax filings, yes.
Okay. And just to let everybody know that, the podcast and having Michael on the show to talk about, once again, the top 5 reasons why you shouldn't be rolling your IRA into an RRSP, we always want to do just a real kind of a little bit of a teaser, like, probably 20 minutes or so on the podcast. And then down the road, we will be asking Michael to do a webinar with us. So that way that there's a lot more participation with the audience. I was telling everybody on the last podcast that we've got this new feature coming up on the Snowbird app. And it'll basically, when you turn on the app, it'll populate of an upcoming webinar. And our purpose here at Snowbird US Day Tracker is really just to educate people that are crossing the borders as often as I do, as others do. And it's purely just educational. And on that note, Michael, let's jump into it. So Carson, one of my colleagues, actually my son-in-law, wrote a great blog, and it was called The Top 5 Reasons Why You Should Not Roll Your IRA into an RRSP. So the first question I'm going to ask you, tell me first of all, before we get into the questions, tell me, do you see a lot of that? People trying to use a 60J rollover and rolling funds from an IRA into an RRSP? And tell me your opinion on this. Does it work? Doesn't work? Go ahead.
That is a problem I deal with many of my clients and potential clients. They live in the States, they work in the States, they put money into their 401k, into their IRA, and once they move back to Canada, they want to bring their money back to Canada. And the way to do it is to roll the 401k to the IRA and then to RSPs. And my biggest problem was to convince them not to do it, but most of them want to do it. Mainly, the main reason is they just want all of it to be in one spot, just easier for them to maintain. They look for simplicity, but they don't really understand the tax consequences, what happens to this money when they roll it to RSPs. It becomes, you pay tax on it, and then at death, it becomes all of it taxable. So they don't understand all this aspect. So this is one of the struggles I have with many of my clients.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think what happens, Michael, is that a lot of advisors are not licensed on both sides of the border. So I would argue sometimes that the relationship is with the Canadian advisor. The Canadian advisor has a conflict because it's more money under management. And hey, this is great. Don't worry, the 60J will take care of everything for you. But it does come with a lot of a lot of disadvantages. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the value of your IRA is not taxable in Canada upon your death. So let's assume that everything going forward from here, we're not going to be using a 60J rollover. We're going to tell you all the wonderful things that you're going to benefit by keeping your IRA in United States. So the first one, let's talk about death, the options around death of the annuitant who owns the IRA.
Yeah, it is true that one of the issues I deal with the clients is their advisor. They're more like biased. They want the money to be in Canada, so they try to convince them to bring it to Canada, and a lot of them do this. And the biggest issue I have is debt. It's unfortunate to say I did have a story like this a couple of years ago. A client who worked in the States came to Canada back, and he's moved like close to $1 million of his IRA to RSPs. And against my wish, against my will, and unfortunately, people don't think of these things. Like his wife passed away with cancer. A year later, he passed away with cancer, and all of a sudden, over $1 million becomes taxable, and half of it, 40%, goes to the government on the spot, right? And people don't predict this. People don't think this far ahead, but these things happen, and I see it, and it bothers me when I see these things. This tax could have been saved. So the minute taxpayer passed away, all RSPs becomes taxable. Once the second spouse, right, it all becomes taxable, and people don't think that way. While the IRA, it's not taxable at date of death. That's where you can save a lot of money.
Yeah, and you could do a lot of planning around it too, because what happens is that your children could inherit this IRA. They've got a 10-year window from the time of death that they can do some planning with Michael. And it gives Michael so much flexibility. So that is the number one reason why you shouldn't roll your IRA into an RRSP. Now, number two, we've kind of already answered, because we said your adult children can become a beneficiary of this inherited IRA. And of course, like Michael said, you would avoid tax. And all of a sudden, that inherited IRA, you have flexibility. Talk more about the flexibility of that 10-year window. I'm even dealing with a client now, Jeanette Lecoq. She is dealing with this IRA, and she's thinking of what happens at date of death, and she wants to try to push this money to her kids. Which kids? The one with the lower tax bracket, and these options you get if you have an IRA. While you just don't get this if you have a RSP, you get a lot of room for planning. You can defer your tax over 10 years, and there could be some choices with grandkids if they're adults too, right? So you could push the tax over 10-year period. That's a lot of tax savings if you do it than all at once. Especially, you can get more like tax bracket, gradual tax brackets to pay tax on these things. You give your money 10 years of chance of growth. While it's an RSP, it gets taxed at once. And even if you're Canadian, you still can inherit IRA without a lot of tax complications, and you still can invest the IRA. So I just have I don't understand why would people want to move this money to RSPs. They just they really limit themselves with a lot of options that they could save. And I think, Michael, what happens out there is that the Canadian advisor is just not familiar with an IRA. They don't explore it. And even if they were trying to educate themselves on Google or whatever, they still don't see the benefit of it. And the conflict is always towards them. And don't worry about it. You can split the income with your wife, but you're right to say that the death on the annuitant, the surviving annuitant, when that person dies, you have very limited options. And most kids that are receiving these inherited IRAs are in their 50s. Mom and dad are 70, 75, 80 years old. It could lead to early retirement and better planning.
That's a good point. Good point. Yes, I agree. And I do agree with you. I think a lot of advisors, either they don't know about the IRA because it's a U.S. concept, or they would rather have the investments in their funds. You know, they're more biased that way. They're not unbiased in that decision. So, and which is unfortunate.
I think the other thing too, Michael, is that when people take that U.S. funds and the advisor says, well, look, it's 1 million, but if you convert it to Canadian, it now becomes 1.386 or whatever that current exchange is. So I think that kind of can kind of influence people. And remember, I think advisors are salespeople, so I get it. They're going to make everything look really good, but not know the negative impact. The other thing here is too what we found, and yes, I do have this life outside of the Snowbird USA tracker, where I'm a cross-border manager for a major firm in Canada here. But I haven't had one person complain about U.S. income having a retirement in Canada. Wouldn't we all love to have that U.S. income coming in and paying Canadian dollars for all our expenses? So nobody's complained. And Michael made a very good point on point number 3, is that IRA can continue to grow in an inherited IRA. And it doesn't have to be divided over 10 years. It could be as long as the money is out of the IRA during 10 years from the time of the passing of the annuitant. So let me see what else that Carson has written on this blog, which is a great blog. It's very well received amongst a lot of the people we work with. So the next one is tax on your IRAs only due when you withdraw from both Canadian and the U.S. side. So explain how that IRA is taxed, because it's going to be in the United States, and how is it taxed from a U.S. point of view, because they still want their money, and how is it taxed in Canada for those people taking money out?
If they're non-citizens, non-residents, they don't have to. The bank would hold 15% of the funds, and that's technically the tax they pay. They don't have to file a U.S. tax return. The government got their 15% under the treaty agreement. Then this becomes taxable in Canada as foreign pension. You get a credit for the tax you pay, the 15%, and then you pay the difference if your tax bracket is above the 15%. Okay,
so like you say, the 15% is held back by the institution who owns it, who holds the IRA, and then that 15% is a foreign tax credit applied to tax being held in Canada.
Yes. This way you avoid double taxation, so you do get credit for that 15% tax when you file in Canada.
And that's all disclosed in the treaty between Canada and the United States?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the other thing, and of course, and now it is taxed in when you convert those US dollars to Canadian dollars on the Canadian side. So if it was $100,000 that you received, you would have $15,000 taken out. Now the $100,000, is it taxed as Canadian dollars or US dollars?
No, it's taxed. It's converted to Canadian dollars. So it becomes, let's say it becomes 130,000 Canadian, but the tax rate also, the $15,000 also gets converted to Canadian dollars. So it becomes what, $18,000 or $19,000 tax credit.
Okay. Now, and it's done they do the conversion on the day, or is there a kind of a prescribed rate that they would use throughout the year when you file tax returns?
We use average rate throughout the year. There's an average rate we use, and that's the rate we use for everything. So, yeah.
Okay. And we've kind of answered this question already as well, but we said that your IRA investments can remain in USD currency, and that is big. And like I say, no one, Michael, has ever complained about receiving U.S. income in Canada.
They're grateful. I have many clients who kept their money in the IRA, and now they're getting this minimum payments. And to add to this, it's not only this, but the way I see it, I'm only a CPA, I'm not an investor, but the way I see it, the investments in the States, it's a bigger market, bigger funds, always result in higher returns and also lower fees. While here in Canada, they're a lot more limited in this kind of investments, and the fees are kind of higher as well. So not one client complaining about the fact that they're getting their pension from the US. It's just their funds are doing a lot better. They're growing a lot better than in Canada, and the exchange rate is really amazing to them. They're loving it, right? So no complaints, but I've heard a lot of complaints from those who move their money to the RSPs.
Yeah, and it's too bad because I think the regulatory bodies, may it be IROC or even FINRA is the major body, governing body in the United States. But IROC is going to have to start to deal with this issue of this 60J rollover, and advisors are convincing people that this is the best thing to do. So I'm putting on my compliance hat for a second. But I think this has to be addressed amongst Canadian advisors.
Yes, I agree. And well, one thing to add to this one, like if you want to bring all your money, let's say you've got $1 million in IRA, you want to bring it to RSPs, you bring it under the 60G, but you still pay 15% tax on it, on that amount. So on the spot, you lost 15% of your money. While if you kept it in IRA, you still can invest this money and just pay tax whenever you withdraw it as you need it. So even this, like if you have $1 million, now you have $850,000 to bring to Canada.
And like you say, a lot of times that 15% which is withheld, and then you've got tax credits going back and forth. Sometimes these tax credits don't add up, and people are going to have to go to the bank and borrow 150 grand just to make sure that those things all line up. Have you seen that quite often?
Very. I do see it. It happens now and then where there's not enough tax in Canada to offset the 15%, and you kind of like lose the 15%, right? So at one point when you withdraw it, you're gonna have to pay tax on it. So it could lead into double taxation. You see that now and then, and it happens with people who have a lot of deductions, where they can get this money and they're not really taking advantage of the 50%. I think they end up getting 5% or 10%, which means they're double taxed on the rest of the money. You see this. You cannot not see it when you do a lot of these transactions.
I'm going to apologize to our listeners because so much of our podcast is focused on snowbirds that go down south for the winter and are concerned about immigration and tax. But at the same time, we have to start creating more content like we're dealing with here for these expats. Because last time I checked, Michael, and you can add to this number or take it away, but I hear there's 1 million expats living in Canada right now. Have you heard is the number bigger or smaller?
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot bigger than 1 million. Way bigger than 1 million. I think we're in the millions of these group in Canada.
Isn't that something? So we got to make a point of making sure that we have a lot more. So on that note, what other issues should expats live up in here in Canada? What should they be dealing with, or what should they be concerned about when they're sitting down with a smart man like yourself?
Well, the main thing, people don't think of tax a lot. They think of like they want to relocate to Canada, for example, right? They're not thinking about tax or scenarios. They just move into Canada. They think things are simple, right? But they don't understand there's tax consequences when you move to a different country or when you do business in another country. So the first step you do is understand you're in different tax scenario. You will be in a more complicated tax scenario, and you have to come up with planning. If you don't do planning, you really could end up wasting a lot of your money, paying a lot of double tax, extra tax to the government. You don't need to do it. So a lot of these people need to understand, you know what, I need to think about tax. It's just not different country, different politics, different weather, different thing, the families. No, there has to be tax consequences to this. And you need to understand, like in many things, we're just talking about IRA now, but there are so many other aspects. Like if you have portfolio, you have a different basis for these things when you move to a different country, right? So you have to say, I have to think about tax, and I need to get advice, consulting service on what I'm gonna have to do before I move to this country, or you need to do this before you move to this country, so you're well prepared to what you need to face.
And Michael, we've talked about this a few times. You need to assemble a great cross-border team, immigration, tax, and a cross-border advisor.
That's absolutely true. This way you protect yourself.
And make sure that those that cross-border accountant, that immigration officer, and the advisor have a relationship they can communicate to make sure that this information is not falling through the cracks as well.
That's very true. Very true. Yeah. Because you see a lot. I see a lot of my clients being hurt by this, which is unfortunate. And a lot of times it's just hard to do much after you move in here and after you've done a lot of transactions. It's just hard to go back and fix these things.
A common question that's being asked out there when we meet these people, or they're being referred to us, and they say, how soon should I start working with my accountant, my cross-border, my immigration guy, and the advisor, may it be ourselves or whoever? And I would always say it's never too soon.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, very true. Now, before we move on and let you get back to your busy day, tell me more about your career. We all seem to kind of settle into our own little home, but we all start at a bigger firm. So tell me more about your career.
My career. Okay, well, I used to live in California. I moved from Jerusalem to California when I was 16. I went to college there, university, and then I became a CPA in California. And then I moved to Vancouver, and I got married in Vancouver here. So I decided to stay in Vancouver. And then I got to understand that the cross-border is going to be a big demand here. So after I became CPA in Canada, I tried to focus on the cross-border. There's not a lot of CPAs that do cross-border in Vancouver, in BC. And I started my business about 12 years ago. And my focus is just cross-border. My business just grew. Now we're a firm of 8 people. And we look always to take care of our clients that live here or want to invest in the States, or U.S. clients wants to invest in Canada. But that's my career in a nutshell, yeah.
Okay, so when you came across as a permanent resident, and then
Yes.
you became a citizen?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're not aware, the other app that we created is called the Canada Physical Presence Tracker. So those Americans that come up on the PR card, they got to be physically present for 1,095 days over 5 years. Being in jail doesn't count. And what we did was we put it out there with the immigration community. And surprisingly, haven't done any marketing around this app. But about 2 months ago, we had a problem with Amazon on the back end of the app. And I must have got about 100 emails over 2 days, people telling me that it was down. So it is being very well accepted out there in the immigration community. So, but I'll tell you what, Michael, I really appreciate your time. We'll let you get back to your busy day. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys.
And remember, everybody, the world is small. Be kind to all. Have a great day.